Over the years, what types of different projects have you engaged with before we jump into a few specifics?
Yeah. So, the projects needed to be in line with that mission of reimagining real estate and empowering communities and uniting cities. As a result of the work that my dad had been doing in public education with the Baltimore City school system, he was hearing from all of these teachers who were new to Baltimore. A lot of them were coming through programs like Baltimore City Teacher Residency and Teach for America. And these first year teachers were showing up to Baltimore for the first time without the foggiest understanding of how Baltimore worked, where to live. They had 5 days to figure it all out, and they were making poor living decisions. Then they were getting thrown into the classroom in Baltimore City, and they were getting burnt out during the day, and then they were getting burnt out at night, and they were quitting. They were just giving up on their classrooms, on public education, and on Baltimore altogether, and they were flying back to Colorado or New York or LA or wherever they had come from. And a bunch of them were saying to my dad that it would be really neat if there was a well-located, affordable, funky apartment building to house teachers new to Baltimore. And, my dad, being the listener that he was, loved the idea. Simultaneously, there were a bunch of nonprofits that were underpinning the success of the Baltimore City school system. They were housed in dozens of buildings all over town with no ability to really collaborate, share resources and ideas because they weren't under the same roof. And they were saying similar things. If there was a building where we could kind of all be located together, we'd have greater impact on the kids in the classroom. And so we knew that our first project would have something to do with housing for teachers and office space for nonprofits. So we started going around all over Baltimore looking for little 4-unit apartment buildings that could get renovated and fixed up for a couple teachers, or little 5,000 square foot office buildings that could get fixed up for a couple nonprofits. And after 3 or 4 months, we just continued to strike out to the point that I didn't know if our company would make it. We're 4 months in, that we don't have a project to speak of. There doesn't appear to be much traction. And the phone rings. I feel like my life story is a series of phone calls.
I was going to say,
this was not Nelson Mandela.
Fascinating.
It was a buddy of mine, Sam. And Sam says, there's a building in Baltimore City at the corner of Howard and 26th Street in a neighborhood called Remington, which I had never heard of this neighborhood before. And he says, the building's 150 years old. It's been vacant for 30 years. Every developer in Baltimore has walked through it and passed on the opportunity because of the condition of the building, of how complicated development is in that community, and because nobody can make the economics work. The bank is in the process of foreclosing on a developer from DC who bought it because he didn't know anything about the community and couldn't make the project work. And Sam says, this building's perfect for the idea you guys are looking for. And I'm like, I still don't know the first thing about development. I'm like, even that doesn't sound like a good idea to me. What a terrible sales pitch. But Chris, we have nothing to lose, right? And so we agreed to meet Sam and the banker at this building, which was the old H.F. Miller and Son tin can manufacturing facility. And so my dad and I pull up early on whatever the day was. And in front of us is this massive, looming 100,000 square foot collapsing factory building. Trees are growing out of the roof. Every single window is boarded up. Bricks are falling out of the facade, actively falling out on the facade onto the concrete below.
Oh, no.
Buildings surrounded by abandoned homes and buildings, lifeless streets. And so we do this lap around the building because we've got a little time to kill. There are rats, Baltimore City rats, the size of small dogs that are scurrying in and out of the massive holes in the foundation. And so I look at my dad like, this can't be the right thing. So we make our way around, and Sam and the representative from the bank are there, and the banker's in this crisp suit, hair slicked back to the side, does not look like he belongs in this community. And he takes one look at us and he says, are you guys sure you want to go in? And, we've kind of come this far. So we say, yeah. And you go to the back and there's this massive, like 10-pound chain and lock on this huge wood door, and he opens the lock and with a giant kick opens the door, and he's got one single flashlight, this like strobe of light that goes into this building, and bats are flying around, pigeons are flying around. We've obviously disturbed the ecosystem that exists in there. And we take this cautious step in. It's kind of pitch black, and we start to make our way through the building. And there are, with every like turn, there's a soiled mattress surrounded by heroin needles and booze bottles, and 3/4 of the roof and ceiling had kind of collapsed in. You could barely walk in most of the building. And the banker's going off on this building. You wouldn't catch me here ever, especially after dark. Best thing anybody could do would be tear down this building. No one would ever want to develop here. He's going off on it. And I begin to tune him out. You know, I've heard this narrative all over the world of the people who are only able to see what's in front of them in that moment and not what something could be or not what something ought to be.
Right.
And so I begin the process of not listening to this banker. And I begin to actually fall in love with this building. I had noticed the massive 14-foot ceilings, the heavy timber structure that exists, the beautiful brick walls, the huge window openings that have been boarded up, but with new windows could be incredible. And I have this transformation as we're walking through, and we get an hour later, we're back on the street. We say our goodbyes to the banker and to Sam and my dad. Take another look at my dad, and I could see the like glimmer in his eye, and he's gone through the same transformation. We give each other another massive hug, and we know this is going to be our first project, Chris. So over the next couple of weeks, we start bringing our most trusted advisors and friends and real estate people who feel like they know what they're talking about for tours of the building. Over a dozen of them. Every single one of them tells us we're crazy, that the building's too far gone, that this neighborhood will never work, that you'll never be able to make the economics work and keep the rents low for teachers and nonprofits. Even our wives come for a tour. And my dad tells this really funny story of on the ride home with my mom, after the tour, she says, Donald, if you buy this building, of all of the dumb things you've done throughout your life, this will be the dumbest. But again,
that was the sign off right there.
That was the motivation we needed. But again, I'd heard the cants and no's around the world, you know, and I'd come to appreciate the significance of them, especially when they come in that quantity. And I also knew the importance to get on the other side of them, that whatever the idea was that we were going to be part of helping to grow, that we had to build it inside out. Yeah. Meaning that the end users, the community, and the team that would be in place had to all feel the same sense of pride of ownership and authorship in what was going to be created. We understand the massive lift in front of us with all of these people who say it's impossible. We start the process of building from the inside out. So we send out, and that means starting with the end users, who are the teachers and the nonprofits who are going to be living and working in the building. So we send this email out to about 1,000 Baltimore City public school teachers, which basically says, anybody interested in creating stunning Class A apartments at deep discounts for teachers, meet us on the corner of Howard and 26th Street for this tour and focus group. And so we show up that morning. It was a Saturday morning. And by like 9:15, the last of 10 straggling teachers have like shown up. I'm heartbroken because I think hundreds of teachers are going to be there. But 10 was the magic number, and an incredible 10 it was. And my dad hops up on this curb, and he gives probably the most inspiring impromptu speech I've ever heard. And he says, for years, I've watched how hard you all work in the classrooms. And there's a group of your peers that have asked to create affordable housing for all of you who are doing this really important work in our cities. We have no idea what we're doing in this project. There's a building behind us, he's pointing to the building behind us, that reimagined by you could become the country's first center for educational excellence. And we'd love to give you a tour and see if and pick your brains to see if this is something you want to do. And he says, so who wants to go in? And the cries of like, hell yes, and let's go felt like a passionate speech from a coach at halftime where his team was trailing in the championship game. And so we go to the same door and we kick it open. We've got flashlights for everybody. The difference on this tour, Chris, was that we weren't the ones leading it. The teachers were effortlessly skipping through this building, and they could have pointed to all of the negative things that everybody else saw, but they pointed to all of the incredible attributes of this building. Look how high the ceilings are. Look how big the window openings are. Look how cool that courtyard would be if you took out the forest that exists in it today. And so we end up back on the street, and they're talking about this is going to be so cool when we pull it off, right? So it was that subtle shift and that invitation from my dad for this to be their project and not his, right? That leveling of the playing field where we weren't showing up as real estate developers telling somebody what we were going to do. We were showing up as curious and passionate entrepreneurs who wanted to see how the groups who would be in the space would mold it to fit their best needs. We did the same thing with these group of nonprofits who were really interested in. Before we knew it, these teachers and nonprofits were all in. They spent a year with our design team. They designed every square inch of the building. They chose their own rents. They picked their own amenities, and they laid it out in the way that would work best for them and for their peers and colleagues. So with the teachers and nonprofits, the end users bought in. We did the same thing with the community. And we showed up to this cinder block church in this neighborhood where there hadn't been any development in over 50 years. That any attempt at development, the community had run out whoever the developer was, apparently without rhyme or reason. So this is part of the reason that most said that development in this neighborhood of Remington just wouldn't work. And we're sitting in the back, and the president of the association calls us up. I'm so nervous. My dad appears to be so cool. And we get up to the front, and my dad kind of does it again, right? And he says, we want to be really clear that this is your building, right? This isn't ours. There is a group of teachers and nonprofits who have come up with this idea to create the country's first Center for Educational Excellence. We've looked all over town for a building, and we've landed up at this building at the heart of your community, which we understand has been vacant for a long time. This only works if you help these teachers and nonprofits figure out what this should become. Is this something that would be interesting to you all as a community to having within your space? So the hands fly up all over the place. This is exactly what we want for our community. This is the development we'd always been hoping for. Towards the end of all of the praise for this idea, this young man in the back stands up and says, almost defiantly, I thought he was going to bring this project crashing down. He says, this is great and all, and would really resonate with us here in Remington. But if you build this building and it's just offices and apartments, the community won't be able to actually go inside the four walls and participate in the finished product other than looking at it from the street.
Right.
If you take the corner of Howard and 26th Street, which was scheduled to be a little 2-bedroom apartment, and set it aside for a coffee shop, a little cafe, there'll be a place for us to grab a cup of coffee together and a decent bite to eat and share ideas. So I start thinking, this is the worst idea I've ever heard of. The corner of Howard and 26th Street was not a place that anybody would ever want to walk to. We had it programmed to be this beautiful little apartment for teachers, which is the reason the project existed to begin with. And here is this guy from this community asking us to take an enormous risk on something, a retail shop, which just would not work there. And I catch myself, Chris, being that naysayer, right? That person who can only see what's in front of them in that moment, not what something could be with the right amount of love and attention. So I shake that off, and we thank him for his kind of feedback and agree to give it some serious thought. And we did. We went back, and I'll come back to the coffee shop story because it's really relevant. The communities are bought in. The teachers and nonprofits are 100% bought in. And the next thing to do is make sure that the team, our guardian angels, are equally as invested and excited about this project, because we've just learned that the total price of the project to build it would be $20 million, which is in and of itself wasn't the end of the world. It was probably $19 million more than we thought our first project would cost. The problem was that because of the low rents that the teachers and nonprofits wanted to pay, we could only afford a $6 million bank loan. So we had this $14 million gap in our capital stack. And so we circled up with this incredible hero of ours, this guy, Bart Harvey, who was a disciple of the late Jim Rouse, the creator of Enterprise Community Partners. And we gave him the same tour, and we ended up at this little diner down the road. And we basically said that we had this huge problem. We had a massive gap in our funding stack. We had no idea how to fill it. The momentum was contagious for this project to move forward. But we were really at an impasse. And this guy, Bart Harvey, was probably one of the most creative thinkers around how to finance really complicated projects. And he says, you've got nothing to worry about. I've got your back. He starts telling us about new market tax credits and historic tax credits and low interest loans from states and cities, all these things that we had no idea. The meeting ends, and then the next week the phone starts ringing off the hook because Bart had started the process of reaching out and to his peers around the country who specialized in this, and everybody wanted to participate in the growth of this movement around this, creating the country's first Center for Educational Excellence. Within like a few months, that gap had been completely eliminated. All $20 million was in place. We closed financing. Wow. We start construction the week before Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, right? We might have timed that in a good way. We might have timed that in a bad way. We had no idea what was going to happen.
Wow.
And within 3 months of starting construction, 9 months before the project finished, 100% of the building had been leased, all of the apartments and all of the office space. By the time we finished construction, there was a waiting list of over 300 teachers waiting to get in and over a dozen nonprofits who we would completely run out of space for. And it had nothing to do with us, right? It was because of this groundswell that had been created because the teachers, the nonprofits, the communities, and the end users, the banks and the lenders and the investors all felt the same sense of pride of ownership and authorship in what was being created. It didn't get leased because of us. It got leased because of the momentum that this exciting idea had generated. So really long-winded story of our first project and how we got started.